The stagecoach rattled into Wasco, California, on a blistering August afternoon in 1882, carrying the most beautiful scandal Boston society had ever produced. And Trent McAllister knew his lonely life was about to change the moment he saw her stumble down those dusty steps with chains still marking her wrists. Lydia Garrett had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing to marry the railroad magnate her father had chosen, then compounding her crime by helping his mistress escape with enough damning letters to ruin 3 prominent families. Her punishment had been swift and merciless. The courts gave her a choice: marry the magnate anyway or accept exile to the California frontier to work as an indentured teacher for 5 years. She chose the desert, the dust, and the unknown over a lifetime of captivity in silk and pearls. Trent had been leaning against the post outside the general store, his hat pulled low against the sun, when the stage arrived. He was 26, weathered by wind and work, with hands that knew rope and leather better than anything soft. He had built his small ranch from nothing, carved it out of unforgiving land through sheer stubborn will, and he had been alone for all of it. Women were scarce in Wasco, and the few who came through took one look at his rough edges and kept moving toward San Francisco. But this woman was different. Even covered in travel dust, even with her dark blonde hair falling from its pins and her fine dress torn at the hem, she held herself like royalty. Her green eyes swept the town with barely concealed horror, taking in the unpainted buildings, the rutted Main Street, the handful of curious faces gathering to see what the East had sent them. Sheriff Tom Ridley met her at the stage, papers in hand. Trent could hear every word in the afternoon stillness. "Miss Garrett, I am Sheriff Ridley. You will be staying at the boarding house and beginning your teaching duties on Monday. The schoolhouse is at the end of town. You will teach 6 days a week, and you are forbidden from leaving Wasco or the surrounding 5 miles without written permission from myself or Judge Harrison. Do you understand?" Lydia lifted her chin. "I understand that I have been sent to hell and you are my warden. Shall we proceed with the formalities, or would you prefer I grovel first?" Several of the gathered men laughed, but Trent saw the tremor in her hands, the way her breathing was too quick. She was terrified and covering it with thorns. The sheriff frowned. "Watch your tongue, Miss Garrett. You are here as punishment, not guest. Mind yourself, or your sentence can be extended." "Extended? How delightful! Perhaps I shall earn myself a full decade in paradise." Trent found himself moving forward before he quite decided to. "Sheriff, the lady looks about to collapse from heat. Maybe save the lecture until she has had some water." Ridley turned, irritation plain on his face. "This does not concern you, McAllister." "No, sir, it does not. But it is over 100 degrees, and she has been traveling for near 2 weeks by my guess. Common decency says we get her inside." Lydia's eyes found Trent's, and for a moment her mask slipped. He saw gratitude there and something else. A question, maybe. Who was this sunburned cowboy intervening on her behalf? The sheriff grunted. "Fine. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house is expecting her. Miss Garrett, collect your things." "I have only 1 bag. Everything else was sold to pay for my transport." Her voice was steady, but Trent heard the wound beneath the words. They had stripped her of everything. He stepped forward and retrieved her single carpetbag from the stage driver. "I will walk her over to Mrs. Chen." "I am heading that way anyway." It was a lie. His horse was tied in the opposite direction, but Lydia needed an ally, even if she did not know it yet, and something in Trent's chest had cracked wide open the moment their eyes met. They walked in silence for half a block, the only sounds their footsteps in the dust and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Finally, Lydia spoke. "Thank you. You did not have to do that." No one should be spoken to like property, no matter what brought them here. She glanced at him sideways. You do not know what I did. Perhaps I deserve it. Do you? Lydia was quiet for a long moment. I defied my father. I helped ruin men who thought women existed only for their pleasure and advancement. I refused to be sold like livestock. So yes, according to Boston, I deserve this and worse. Trent stopped walking and she stopped too, turning to face him. Up close, he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the exhaustion in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. Then I am glad they sent you here, he said quietly. Boston does not deserve you. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked young and lost. You know nothing about me. I know you have got courage. That is more than most. Before she could respond, they reached the boarding house. Mrs. Chen, a practical woman who had come west during the gold rush and stayed when her husband died in the mines, opened the door with a measuring look at Lydia. You are the teacher, then. I have your room ready. It is small but clean. Meals are included in what the county pays me for your keep. Bath is Saturday nights. No men above the first floor, no drinking, no entertaining. Understood? Perfectly. Lydia's armor was back in place, her voice cool and clipped. Trent handed Mrs. Chen the bag and tipped his hat to Lydia. Welcome to Wasco, Miss Garrett. I hope it treats you better than you expect. He walked away before she could answer, but he felt her gaze on his back until he turned the corner. That night, alone in his small ranch house 5 miles outside town, Trent could not stop thinking about her. About the way she had faced down the sheriff with her world crumbling around her. About the split second when she had looked at him with hope instead of armor. He had been lonely for so long he had almost forgotten what it felt like to want something more than just getting through the day. But now he remembered, and it ached like a bruise. The next morning was Sunday, and the whole town turned out for church. Trent usually skipped it, his relationship with God being complicated and private, but today he cleaned up and rode into town early. He told himself it was because he needed supplies. He did not examine too closely why he positioned himself where he could see the boarding house door. Lydia emerged in a simple gray dress, her hair pinned severely back. She looked pale but composed as she walked to the small, whitewashed church. The other women gave her a wide berth, whispering behind their hands. She was an outsider and worse, a scandal. They would not welcome her easily. Inside, she sat alone in the back pew. Trent watched from across the aisle as Reverend Walsh droned through his sermon about redemption and sin. The Reverend's eyes kept drifting to Lydia, his tone turning pointed when he spoke of pride and defiance. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, giving away nothing. After the service, as people filed out into the morning sunshine, a group of women surrounded Lydia. Trent could not hear what they were saying, but their body language was clear. This was not a welcome. This was a warning. The leader was Martha Simmons, the mayor's wife, a woman who ruled Wasco's social hierarchy with an iron fist wrapped in lace gloves. Miss Garrett, we want to make something clear. You may be teaching our children, but that does not make you respectable. You will conduct yourself with absolute propriety, and you will not put any ideas into impressionable young heads. Lydia met her gaze steadily. I plan to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and perhaps some history and science if your children are capable of learning it. If knowledge counts as dangerous ideas in Wasco, then yes, I suppose I am a threat. Martha's face flushed. Do not be smart with me, girl. We know why you are here. We know what you did. One wrong step, and we will make sure your sentence is extended until you are too old to cause trouble anywhere. Mrs. Simmons. Trent's voice cut through the tension. He had not planned to intervene again, but his feet had carried him over without consulting his brain. The Reverend just finished preaching about Christian charity. Maybe we could show some. Martha turned her glare on him. Stay out of this, Trent McAllister. You may be respectable now, but we all remember where you came from. It was a low blow. Trent had arrived in Wasco 8 years ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation for being his father's son. He had spent years proving he was different, that the sins of violent drunks did not pass through blood. He had nearly succeeded in making people forget. But Martha remembered everything and wielded it like a weapon. Yes, madam, I am sure you do. Come on, Miss Garrett. I will walk you back to the boarding house. Lydia looked between him and Martha, clearly calculating whether accepting his help would make things better or worse. Finally, she nodded and walked with him away from the cluster of hostile women. They had gone half a block before she spoke. You should not have done that. They will make you pay for defending me. Let them try. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. I am here as punishment, just like they said. I am trouble. Trent stopped and looked at her directly. You want the truth? Because when I got here 8 years ago, no one helped me. They all knew my father had drunk himself to death after near beating my mother to death first. They all assumed I would turn out the same. I had to prove myself every single day, and it was the loneliest thing I have ever done. I do not want that for anyone else. Lydia's expression softened. I am sorry. About your mother, she survived. Moved to Oregon to live with her sister. We write sometimes. He paused. The point is, everyone deserves at least one person on their side, and it looks like I am yours if you will have me. She studied his face for a long moment. I am not sure I know how to trust anyone anymore. That is all right, I am patient. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. Walk me back then, Mr. McAllister, and perhaps you can tell me what I am truly facing here. So he did. As they walked slowly through the dusty streets, he told her the truth about Wasco. It was a small town hanging on by its fingernails, propped up by a few determined ranchers and the railroad stop that brought occasional business. The people were hardworking but suspicious of outsiders. The children were eager to learn but often needed at home for work. The last teacher had left after 6 months, unable to handle the isolation and hostility. Why did she leave? Lydia asked. She fell in love with a traveling merchant and ran off to Sacramento, left in the middle of the night. Trent shook his head. The town has been without a teacher for 4 months. Your students are going to be behind and their parents are going to blame you. Of course they are. But Lydia's voice held determination now instead of despair. Well, Mr. McAllister, I have 5 years to change their minds. I might as well start Monday with a plan. It is Trent. And what kind of plan? I have no idea yet. But I have survived Boston society, my father's wrath, and 2 weeks in a stagecoach with a drunk miner and a woman who would not stop talking about her bowel problems. I can survive Wasco. Trent laughed, surprising himself. I believe you can, Miss Garrett, Lydia. If you are going to be my one ally, you should use my name. They had reached the boarding house. Lydia paused on the steps, her hand on the railing. Trent, thank you, truly. I did not do much. You did more than anyone else. She smiled then, small and tired but real. Will I see you again? I come into town most Saturdays for supplies, and I guess I will start attending church more regularly. He grinned. Got to keep an eye on my investment. She rolled her eyes, but she was still smiling when she went inside. Monday morning arrived with punishing heat. Lydia woke before dawn in her small room, nerves twisting her stomach. She had taught before, back in Boston, giving lessons to the daughters of society families. But this was different. Here she was the outsider, the criminal, the cautionary tale. Here she had something to prove. She dressed carefully in her other dress, navy blue and practical, and pinned her hair back with ruthless efficiency. Then she walked to the schoolhouse at the edge of town as the sun was just breaking over the horizon. The building was worse than she expected. One room, roughly built, with gaps in the walls where the wind could whistle through. Benches instead of desks, a battered chalkboard, and almost no supplies. The previous teacher had left nothing behind. Lydia stood in the center of the empty room and felt despair trying to claw its way up her throat. She had expected primitive, but this was barely functional. How was she supposed to teach anyone anything here? Then she remembered Trent's words. Everyone deserves at least one person on their side. She straightened her spine. These children deserved a teacher who would not give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. She could be that person. She would be that person. By the time her students arrived an hour later, she had swept the floor, arranged the benches into rows, and written the day's lessons on the board in clear, careful script. She had 17 students ranging from 6 to 14, most of them barefoot and sun-browned and openly skeptical. "Good morning," she began, standing in front of them with her hands clasped. "My name is Miss Garrett, and I am your new teacher. I know you do not know me, and I know you may have heard things about why I am here, so I will tell you the truth. I made choices that powerful people did not like, and I was sent here as punishment. But I am a good teacher, and I am going to do my best for you. I ask only that you do your best for me. Is that fair?" A girl of about 12 raised her hand. "What kind of choices?" "I helped someone who needed help, and I refused to marry someone I did not love. Some people think women should not make their own choices. I disagree." A murmur went through the room, then a boy in the back spoke up. "My pa says you are a troublemaker." "Your pa might be right, but sometimes trouble is necessary." She smiled at them. "Now let us see where we are with reading. Who can read for me?" The day was grueling. Her students were indeed behind, some of them barely literate despite their ages. But they were also curious, eager once they saw she would not talk down to them. She taught straight through until 3 o'clock, her voice growing hoarse, her feet aching. When the last child left, she sank onto one of the benches and let her head fall into her hands. She had survived day 1, only 1,800 or so more to go. "You look like you could use this." She jerked her head up. Trent stood in the doorway, holding a canteen of water and a wrapped bundle that smelled like bread and cheese. "How did you know I would forget to bring lunch?" she asked, accepting both gratefully. "Lucky guess." He leaned against the door frame, watching as she drank deeply and then unwrapped the food. "How was it?" "Terrible and wonderful. They are so far behind, Trent. Some of the older ones can barely read, but they want to learn. I could see it in their faces." The last teacher did not care much about actual teaching. She was just marking time until something better came along. "Well, nothing better is coming along for me." Lydia took a bite of bread and cheese, suddenly ravenous, "so I might as well care." Trent smiled. "You are going to be good for this town, whether they know it yet or not." They talked for another hour, Lydia telling him about her students, Trent sharing what he knew about their families and situations. It was easy talking to him, easier than it had been with anyone in Boston. He listened without judgment, offered advice without condescension, and made her laugh when she was too tired to think that was possible. Finally, as the sun began to lower, he stood. "I should get back to the ranch, but I will be in town Saturday if you need anything." "Trent." She stood too, suddenly not wanting him to leave. "Would you? Could you visit again? It helps having someone to talk to." Something bright flashed in his eyes. "I would like that. How about Wednesday afternoons? I could come by after you finish teaching." "That would be perfect." It became their routine. Twice a week, Trent would ride into town with food and water, and they would sit in the schoolhouse and talk as the afternoon heat slowly faded. He told her about ranching, about the brutal work of coaxing life from stubborn land. She told him about Boston, about the suffocating expectations and the brief, glorious moment when she had defied them all. "Do you regret it?" he asked one evening about 3 weeks after she had arrived. "Helping that woman, I mean. If you had known it would end with you here, would you still have done it?" Lydia considered the question seriously. "Yes, because what was happening to her was wrong and I was one of the few people who could stop it. How could I live with myself if I had walked away? Most people would have." "Then most people are cowards." She met his eyes. "Present company excluded." "I do not know about that. I walked away from plenty in my life." "You walked away from violence and cruelty. That is not cowardice. That is survival." They were sitting close together on one of the benches, close enough that she could see the details of his face. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Lydia," he said quietly, and her name in his voice made her heart do something complicated. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I think about you all the time. I ride into town twice a week, but I want to come every day. When I am working on the ranch, I am counting the hours until I can see you again. And I know that is probably the last thing you want to hear. I know you are trapped here, and I am probably just the least terrible option in a bad situation, but I cannot keep pretending this is just friendship for me anymore." Lydia's breath caught. She had known on some level that this was building between them. The long conversations, the easy silences, the way her whole body came alive when he walked into a room. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You are not the least terrible option," she said softly. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in years, maybe ever, Lydia. I think about you too, constantly. When I should be planning lessons, I am wondering what you are doing. When I am falling asleep, I am remembering things you said. And it scares me, Trent, because the last time I let myself care about someone, I lost everything." He reached over and took her hand, his palm rough with calluses against her softer skin. "You will not lose me, I promise you that. You cannot promise that. Life does not work that way." "Then I will promise what I can. I will be here, twice a week or every day if you want. I will stand by you when the whole town turns against you. I will never lie to you or use you for something you are not. That enough?" She looked down at their joined hands, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "More than enough." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then we will figure out the rest as we go." The town noticed, of course. By the next week, everyone knew that Trent McAllister was courting the scandal teacher. The reactions ranged from disapproval to outright hostility. Several mothers pulled their children from Lydia's class, citing concerns about moral influence. The sheriff called Trent in for a pointed conversation about maintaining appropriate distance from an indentured criminal. But Trent ignored them all, and so did Lydia. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, but twice a week they met at the schoolhouse and talked and slowly, carefully, fell more deeply in love. 2 months into the school year, disaster struck. A late-season fever swept through Wasco, hitting the children especially hard. Half of Lydia's students fell ill, and 3 families lost children within a week. The town reeled from the blow, grief and fear making everyone sharp, edged, and desperate for someone to blame. Martha Simmons led the charge. "This is what comes from allowing that woman near our children," she proclaimed at an emergency town meeting. "She brought sin and corruption, and now we are paying the price." "That is nonsense, and you know it," Trent shot back, rising from his seat. "Fever is not caused by sin. It is caused by bad water and bad luck. You would defend her. Everyone knows you are besotted with the girl. It has clouded your judgment." Lydia, sitting in the back of the meeting hall, stood. "Mrs. Simmons, I am deeply sorry for the losses your community has suffered. But I have nothing to do with this fever. If you want to blame someone, blame the fact that half the children in this town are malnourished and overworked. They have no resistance when sickness comes. How dare you criticize how we raise our children? I am not criticizing. I am stating facts. Your children are exhausted and underfed, and it makes them vulnerable. If you want to protect them, feed them better and let them rest occasionally instead of working them like farm animals." The room erupted. Half the parents were shouting at Lydia, the other half were shouting at each other. The mayor banged his gavel uselessly, trying to restore order. Trent pushed through the crowd to reach Lydia's side. "Come on, we need to get you out of here." But Lydia shook her head. "No, I am not running. If they want to blame me, they can do it to my face," and they tried. For the next hour, parent after parent stood up to accuse Lydia of everything from incompetence to witchcraft. She stood and took it, her face pale but her spine straight. When they finally ran out of accusations, she spoke. "I cannot bring back the children you have lost. I cannot cure this fever or promise it will not strike again. All I can do is keep teaching the students who remain and hope that education gives them better opportunities than you had. If you want me gone, tell the sheriff and the judge. They control my fate, not you. But if you let me stay, I promise I will do everything in my power to give your children the tools they need to build better lives. That is all I have to offer." The room was silent. Then, slowly, a man stood in the middle rows. Lydia recognized him as Daniel Kerr, father of 2 of her students. He was a farmer, weathered and work-worn, and he had lost his youngest son to the fever 3 days ago. "My boy Tommy loved going to school," he said quietly. "First time in his life he was excited about something other than chores. Miss Garrett taught him to read in 6 weeks. He was reading to me from the Bible the night before he took sick." His voice broke, and he paused to collect himself. "She did not kill my son. Life killed my son and bad luck, and probably all those things she said about him being too tired and too hungry. She told the truth up there, and we do not want to hear it because the truth makes us look like bad parents, but that does not make it less true." Another parent stood, then another. Slowly, grudgingly, the tide began to turn. Not everyone was convinced, but enough were that when the vote was called on whether to petition for Lydia's removal, it failed. Martha Simmons stormed out in disgust, taking her faction with her. But the majority remained, and several parents approached Lydia afterward to offer quiet apologies. Outside in the cooling night air, Trent pulled Lydia into his arms. She was shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair. "Terrifying and magnificent. I thought they were going to run me out of town. So did I. But you held your ground and you won." She pulled back to look at him. "We won. You stood up for me when no one else would. Always." He kissed her forehead gently. "Come on. Let me walk you home before Mrs. Chen sends out a search party." But as they walked through the dark streets, Lydia felt something settle in her chest. For the first time since arriving in Wasco, she felt like maybe she could make a life here. Maybe she could find belonging in this harsh, unforgiving place. And maybe, just maybe, she could build something real with the cowboy who had seen her arrival as a blessing instead of a curse. The fever eventually burned itself out, leaving grief and empty spaces in its wake. Lydia threw herself into teaching with renewed determination, and slowly, reluctantly, the town began to accept her. Parents saw their children learning and thriving. The school became a source of pride instead of suspicion. Trent's visits continued, now openly acknowledged as courtship. He brought her small gifts, practical things mostly. A warm shawl for the cooling autumn nights, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives. Once, a book of poetry he had ordered special from San Francisco because she had mentioned missing her library. "Trent McAllister, did you just give me Walt Whitman?" she asked, delighted and surprised. He colored slightly. "I asked the bookseller what a smart lady might like. He suggested that one." She kissed his cheek, bold in the privacy of the empty schoolhouse. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "I am about as far from perfect as a man can get. Not to me." As autumn deepened into winter, Trent began bringing her to his ranch on Sundays, their one full day off. He would collect her after church, and they would ride out together into the open land. She learned to appreciate the harsh beauty of the place, the way the light turned the hills gold and amber, the silence that felt like peace instead of punishment. His ranch was small but well tended, the product of years of hard work. He had a small herd of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that struggled gamely against the dry soil. The house was tiny, just 3 rooms, but clean and sturdy. "I built it myself," he told her the first time she saw it. "Took me 2 years, working every spare moment. I wanted something that was mine, that no one could take away." "It is wonderful," she said honestly. She could see the pride in every straight beam, every carefully fitted board. This was a man who built things to last. They would spend those Sundays talking, working side by side in comfortable silence, or just sitting on his small porch watching the sun move across the sky. It was on one of those peaceful afternoons, 4 months after her arrival, that Trent took her hand and said, "Lydia, I need to ask you something." Her heart kicked into a faster rhythm. "What?" "I know you have got 4.5 years left on your sentence. I know asking you to tie yourself to someone before you are even free is unfair, but I also know I have never felt like this about anyone, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Not now, not until you are ready, but someday. Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives?" Lydia felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes, God help me, yes." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her ache. "I will make you happy. I swear I will. You already do." They announced their engagement the next Sunday at church, and the reaction was mixed but mostly positive. The town had grown fond of Lydia despite themselves, and everyone liked Trent. Martha Simmons pursed her lips in disapproval but said nothing. The sheriff reminded them tersely that Lydia could not marry without approval from her overseers until her sentence was complete. "Then we will wait," Trent said firmly. "I have waited this long for her. I can wait longer." But waiting proved harder than either of them expected. Not because their feelings wavered, but because they wanted to start their life together so desperately. Lydia wanted to wake up in Trent's house, to work beside him building something permanent. Trent wanted to fall asleep with her in his arms instead of riding home alone to an empty bed. They remained proper, keeping their physical relationship to chaste kisses and held hands, but the tension built like a gathering storm. "For more years," Lydia said one evening, frustration clear in her voice. 4 more years of living in that boarding house room, of asking permission to go 5 miles outside town, of being treated like a criminal. "I know, but we will get through it. Will we? What if something happens? What if the judge decides to extend my sentence? Or what if there is another fever and they blame me again? What if we waste these years waiting for a freedom that never comes?" Trent cupped her face in his hands. "Then we will deal with it together. You are not alone in this, Lydia. Whatever happens, we face it side by side." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steadiness. "I love you. I do not think I have said that plainly enough. I love you, Trent McAllister, more than I knew I could love anyone. I love you too, more than words can say." The winter of 1882 was cold and wet. unusual for the California Valley. The schoolhouse leaked, and Lydia taught with buckets strategically placed to catch drips. Her students came bundled in whatever warm clothing their families could spare, which was often not much. One particularly bitter day in January, a small girl named Sarah Hollies arrived shivering and blue-lipped, her threadbare coat doing nothing against the cold. Lydia took one look at her and made a decision. She dismissed class early and walked Sarah home herself, wanting to speak to the girl's parents about getting her warmer clothes. The Hollies' place was even worse than she feared. They lived in a shack that barely qualified as shelter, with 5 children and 2 adults crammed into 2 rooms. Mr. Hollies had been injured in a ranch accident and could not work. Mrs. Hollies took in washing but could barely keep up with feeding everyone. "I am doing the best I can," Mrs. Hollies said defensively when Lydia expressed concern. "We do not need charity." "I am not offering charity." "But Sarah cannot learn if she is freezing. What if I brought some extra blankets just to borrow? You could return them when the weather warms." Mrs. Hollies' eyes filled with tears. "That would be kind of you, Miss Garrett." Lydia walked back to town in the gathering dusk, her mind churning. One family was struggling this badly, but she knew there were others in similar situations. The town had no organized way to help its poorest members. Everyone was just barely hanging on, with no safety net when disaster struck. She found Trent at the general store, stocking up on supplies before riding home. "I need your help," she said without preamble, "and probably your wagon." He listened as she explained about the Hollies family and the others she knew were struggling. Then he nodded. "All right, what is your plan?" "I am going to start a relief society. Get the women organized to help families in need. Collect donations, organize food and clothing drives, that sort of thing. But I need someone respected to help me get it started, or people will dismiss it as another wild idea from the scandal teacher." Trent grinned. "You want me to use my masculine respectability to give your good idea credibility?" "Exactly. I am in. When do we start?" They started that week. Trent used his connections among the ranchers and farmers to gather support, while Lydia worked on the town's women. It was slow going at first. Many people were suspicious of anything that smacked of charity or outside interference. But as word spread about families being helped, about children showing up to school with full bellies and warm coats, resistance began to crumble. Martha Simmons held out the longest, insisting that proper families did not need help from others. But when her own brother lost his farm to a bad debt and ended up needing assistance, even she grudgingly admitted the Relief Society might serve a purpose. "Do not expect me to thank you," she told Lydia stiffly. "I do not. I expect you to help." Lydia met her gaze levelly. "Your brother is not the only one struggling, and this is too much work for me to do alone. I could use someone with your organizational skills." It was a calculated risk, offering Martha power in something Lydia had created. But it paid off. With Martha's help, the Relief Society became a genuine force in Wasco, organizing aid and support with ruthless efficiency. And working together, however reluctantly, began to thaw the ice between them. "You are a manipulative woman, Miss Garrett," Martha said one afternoon as they sorted through donated clothing. "I prefer strategic, Mrs. Simmons. I still do not approve of you. I know. But you respect me a little now, do not you?" Martha's lips twitched. "Perhaps a little." Spring arrived with wildflowers and renewed hope. Lydia's students were thriving. The Relief Society was making a real difference, and her relationship with Trent grew deeper every day. On a warm afternoon in late April, he took her out to his ranch and showed her plans he had drawn up for expanding the house. "I thought we could add 2 more rooms here," he explained, pointing to the sketches. "Maybe 3 if we are lucky." That would give us space for a proper bedroom and a study where you could work, and eventually maybe a nursery. Lydia traced the lines of his drawings with one finger. You have been thinking about this every day for months. I want to give you a real home, Lydia. Not something temporary, not something you are forced into, but a place that is truly ours. It is already ours. Any place with you in it is home to me. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. 3.5 more years, I know, but we will make it. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In June, Judge Harrison had a stroke and died suddenly, leaving Wasco without a resident judge. The replacement judge assigned to the territory was based in Bakersfield and only visited once every 3 months. The sheriff, who had never liked having an indentured criminal in his jurisdiction, saw an opportunity. He called Lydia into his office on a Tuesday morning, his face set in hard lines. Miss Garrett, your conduct here has been adequate, and I am willing to write a positive report on your service. However, the town council has requested that you be transferred to Bakersfield to continue your sentence there. They feel having you here is no longer necessary. Lydia felt the floor drop out from under her. What? No, I have students here. I have responsibilities. You cannot just transfer me. I can and I am. The order has already been approved by the circuit judge. You will leave next Monday on the stage. This is Martha Simmons' doing, is it not? She wants me gone. This is the decision of the council and myself. You have 1 week to wrap up your affairs here. Lydia walked out of the sheriff's office in a daze. Transfer to Bakersfield meant leaving everything she had built. Leaving her students, her Relief Society work, her friends. Leaving Trent. She went straight to the schoolhouse, unable to face anyone yet, and sat at her desk with her head in her hands. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Trent found her there an hour later. Someone had ridden out to tell him what happened, and he had come immediately. Lydia. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. They are sending me away. I do not even get to finish the school year. I just get ripped away from everything and everyone. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. No, this is not happening. We will fight it. How? The judge already approved it. I have no rights, Trent. I am property and they are moving me wherever they want. Then we will find another way. He tilted her face up to his. Do you trust me with my life? Then trust me now. We are not losing each other. I will not allow it. What Trent did next was either brilliant or insane, depending on who was asked. He went straight to the circuit judge in Bakersfield and presented a formal petition to marry Lydia immediately, with her remaining sentence to be served as a married woman in Wasco, under his supervision. The judge, a practical man named Lawrence Foster, reviewed the petition with interest. This is highly irregular, Mr. McAllister. Miss Garrett is supposed to serve her full sentence before regaining her rights. Yes, sir, I understand that, but she has been a model citizen in Wasco. She has done more good for that town in 9 months than most people do in a lifetime, and I am willing to take full legal responsibility for her conduct. If she breaks any laws or tries to flee, I will face the consequences. Judge Foster studied him. You are aware that if she runs, you will be charged as an accomplice and could face prison time yourself. I am aware. But she will not run. She has no reason to, not if I can give her a real life in Wasco. You are willing to bet your freedom on that. I am willing to bet my life on it, sir. The judge sat back in his chair. I will need to interview Miss Garrett before I make a decision. Bring her to me tomorrow. Trent rode back to Wasco through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have but unable to wait. He found Lydia at the boarding house, packing her few belongings with mechanical movements. Stop packing, he said from the doorway. We are going to Bakersfield tomorrow to see the judge. I have got a plan. She listened as he explained, her eyes growing wider. Trent, no. I cannot let you risk yourself like that. If something goes wrong, if they decide I have broken some rule they did not tell me about, you could go to prison. Then I will go to prison, but at least we will have tried. This is insane. Probably. Are you willing to do it anyway? Lydia looked at him, this man who had stood by her through everything, who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who was willing to risk his own freedom for hers. Yes. God help us both, yes. They rode to Bakersfield the next morning, arriving at Judge Foster's office by noon. He interviewed Lydia extensively, asking about her crime, her time in Wasco, her intentions going forward. She answered honestly, hiding nothing. Finally, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. Miss Garrett, do you love this man more than anything? And you, Mr. McAllister, are you certain about this? Because if I approve this, there is no backing out. You will be legally bound to supervise her sentence, and any failure on her part becomes your failure. I am certain, Your Honor. I have never been more certain of anything. Judge Foster was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. Against my better judgment, and with serious reservations about the precedent this sets, I am going to approve your petition. You may marry immediately, and Miss Garrett will serve the remainder of her sentence as Mrs. McAllister under her husband's supervision in Wasco. But understand this, both of you. If there is any indication that this arrangement is being abused, if Miss Garrett violates any term of her sentence, you will both face severe consequences. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Then congratulations. I suggest you find a minister quickly before I change my mind. They were married that afternoon in a small church in Bakersfield, with the judge's clerk and a curious secretary as witnesses. Lydia wore her navy teaching dress, and Trent wore his best shirt and pants. They had no rings, no flowers, no celebration. But when the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Trent kissed her with shaking hands cradling her face, Lydia felt like the luckiest woman alive. They rode back to Wasco the next day as Mr. and Mrs. McAllister, the marriage certificate carefully folded in Trent's pocket. The news spread through town like wildfire. Reactions ranged from shock to delight to outrage, but it was done and legal, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. The sheriff was furious. This is a mockery of justice, McAllister. You manipulated the system. I used the system as it exists, Sheriff. If you have a problem with the judge's ruling, take it up with him. Martha Simmons was equally displeased, but she was also pragmatic. Well, at least this solves the problem of finding a new teacher, though I suppose we will have to call you Mrs. McAllister now. You can call me Lydia if you like, Lydia offered. I think I will stick with Mrs. McAllister. Let us not get too familiar. But there was no real heat in her words anymore. Lydia had won, against all odds, and even Martha had to respect that. Lydia moved into Trent's ranch house the following week, bringing her few possessions in a single wagon load. Mrs. Chen cried as she said goodbye, pressing a package of tea and cookies into Lydia's hands. You are a good girl, the older woman said firmly. That cowboy is lucky to have you. I think I am the lucky one. The house was small and rough compared to what Lydia had grown up with in Boston, but it felt like paradise. It was hers, truly, legally hers. No one could take it away or transfer her somewhere else on a whim. She was home. That first night as husband and wife, they lay together in Trent's bed and Lydia cried from sheer relief. Hey, he murmured, pulling her closer. What is wrong? Nothing. Everything is right. For the first time in so long, everything is right, and I do not know how to handle it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Get used to it, because I am going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you are happy. You already do, just by being you. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other with reverent hands and whispered words. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lydia felt a peace she had not known since childhood. "I love you, Trent McAllister." "I love you too, Lydia McAllister. Always." Life settled into a new rhythm. Lydia continued teaching, now riding into town each morning and returning home each evening. Trent worked the ranch, with Lydia helping on weekends and during school breaks. They were building something together, slowly and patiently, brick by brick. The following year brought challenges. A drought tested Trent's herd and they lost several cattle. Lydia had a miscarriage in her 4th month of pregnancy, a grief they weathered together in the quiet privacy of their home. But they endured, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good ones. By the end of Lydia's 2nd year in Wasco, the town had transformed. Her students were reading at grade level and beyond. The Relief Society had expanded to include a small lending library and a community garden. Several families had been helped back onto their feet. And Lydia, the woman sent west as punishment, had become an integral part of the community. Judge Foster came through on one of his circuit visits and called Lydia in to review her progress. He read through the sheriff's reports, the testimonials from parents and town leaders, and the detailed accounts of her work. "Mrs. McAllister, I have reviewed your case thoroughly. Your conduct over the past 2 years has been exemplary. Your contributions to Wasco have exceeded anything reasonably expected. In light of this, and based on the authority granted to me by the territorial court, I am commuting the remainder of your sentence. As of today, you are a free woman with all rights restored." Lydia stared at him, unable to process the words. "Free, free. Your debt to society is considered paid in full. Congratulations." She walked out of the office in a daze and straight into Trent's arms. He had been waiting outside, pacing nervously. "What did he say? I am free. Trent, I am free 3 years early. He commuted my sentence." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. "Free, you are free." That night they celebrated with the whole town. Even Martha Simmons showed up with a cake, her expression grudging but sincere. "I suppose you have earned it, Mrs. McAllister." "Thank you, Martha." Lydia used her first name deliberately, and for the first time, Martha did not correct her. The years that followed were full and rich. Lydia continued teaching, now by choice rather than obligation. She and Trent expanded the house, adding the rooms he had drawn plans for, and then a few more as their family grew. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, was born in the spring of 1885. A daughter, Grace, followed 2 years later, and another son, William. 2 years after that, Trent's ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation into one of the more successful spreads in the region. But he never forgot the lean years, and he made sure to help other struggling ranchers the way he wished someone had helped him starting out. Lydia's school became known throughout the territory for its excellence. Students came from miles around, and several of her former pupils went on to college, something almost unheard of for rural California children. She taught for 25 years, touching hundreds of lives, before finally retiring in 1907. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Trent took Lydia back to the spot where they had first talked alone, the day after she arrived in Wasco. The schoolhouse was still there, now replaced by a larger building but preserved as a historical landmark. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" he asked, holding her hand. "You said Boston did not deserve me. I also said I was glad they sent you here. I meant it then and I mean it now. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lydia. The best thing that ever happened to this whole town." She leaned into him, still fitting perfectly against his side after all these years. "They sent me west as punishment, but it turned out to be the greatest gift of my life, because it brought me you. We found each other. That is all that matters." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had been broken and lost and had found wholeness in each other. Around them, the town they had helped build thrived. Their children were grown and happy, starting families of their own. The Relief Society Lydia had founded still operated, now run by the next generation of women. And the school she had fought so hard for still stood, educating children who would go on to build even bigger things. "No regrets?" Trent asked softly. "Not a single one. You." "Only that I did not see that stagecoach arrive sooner, so I could have had more time with you." She laughed and kissed him, sweet and lingering. "We have had plenty of time, and we have got plenty more ahead of us." And they did. Trent and Lydia McAllister lived to see their children married and their grandchildren born. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, a testament to the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. When Lydia died peacefully in her sleep at age 83, with Trent holding her hand, the entire town mourned. They named the school after her, a permanent reminder of the woman who had been sent west as punishment and had become their greatest blessing. Trent followed her 2 years later, his heart finally giving out while he sat on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sun set over the land they had tamed together. His last words were her name, spoken with all the love of 52 years together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones, but their real monument was all around. In the town they had helped save, in the children and grandchildren who carried on their legacy, in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and courage and stubborn refusal to let injustice win. The story of Trent and Lydia became legend in Wasco. How a disgraced woman from Boston had been sent west in chains and had found freedom, purpose, and love with a cowboy who saw her worth when no one else did. How they had built something beautiful and lasting out of punishment and pain. How they proved that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in our lives. And on summer evenings, when the light turns gold and the air is soft with possibility, people still visit their graves and remember the love story that began with a stagecoach arrival on a blistering August day in 1882. When a cowboy looked up and saw not a scandal but a blessing, and had the courage to fight for it against all odds. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the ranch, working the land their ancestors claimed and tamed. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original 3 rooms Trent built with his own hands remain, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. And in the Lydia McAllister School, named for the woman who refused to let punishment define her, generations of children still learn that courage, determination, and love can transform any fate into a blessing.